The most important thing we can hear from SEC Media Days is...
You are Locked On Sooners, your daily podcast on the Oklahoma Sooners. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Sooner Nation? Welcome to Locked On Sooners, and thank you for making Locked On Sooners your first listen every single day. We're free and available on all podcast platforms and on YouTube, so hit that subscribe button and that notification bell to let you know when new episodes drop. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. I'm John Williams. You can follow me on Twitter at John9Williams. This is Jay Smith. You can follow him on Twitter at Unfair Sports. You're also hearing Jay from SEC Media Days down in Dallas, making things happen for us here on the Locked On Sooners podcast, your team every day. So, Jay, as you kind of gear up and get ready for the first day, full day of SEC Media Days on Monday, what is kind of the most important thing you want to hear from Greg Sankey when he meets with the media?
Honestly, the one thing I'm really curious about is, are we going to hear about the 9-game schedule yet, right? So we know that with the Georgia cancellation of their game against UCLA, the anticipation is that we're going to get 9-game schedule, not for 25, but for the 26 season. They've already said what 24 and 25 is going to be. So we're anticipating that 26 is when they're going to start that. But then at that point, we're going to start seeing cancellation of all of these non-conference games, because that only allows for 3 non-con games, which if you know the SEC, you got to have one cupcake in there along with maybe one from another conference. But if they go to 9, they may eliminate that requirement from it being like a Big 12, an ACC, or a Big 10 team, or a Pac-2 team at the time. They may allow for it to be at the G5, G6 level. So I'm really curious to hear what Sankey says at the opening statements, because I'm really anticipating for us to hear that 9 games are coming down the line.
Yeah, it seems to be that's the direction he's been wanting to go. It's just a matter of getting the rest of the SEC administrators and coaches on board with that. Now, expansion has become a big topic, especially with Big 12 Media Days. Last week, a lot of rumors about ACC teams heading to the Big 12. Mm-hmm. You know Greg Sankey's going to be asked about that. Where do you think the SEC sits right now with any thoughts of expansion?
If realignment does happen and the ACC does basically implode, I sense they're going to go after some of the big boys. It makes sense to go after a Clemson. That adds them right there with South Carolina, keep that rivalry there. Plus, Clemson is a really good football program. They've been really good over the last 15 years. And so that will be a fun one to have in the conference. If you decide to go ahead and really pull after another team out in Florida, you may go after Florida State, or you may push for one of the Carolina teams, or both, right? Get yourself some footing in the Carolina area. That's probably a good one to go after, possibly Virginia. But I'm thinking more so you probably want to go after like a UNC and a North Carolina State, because I know that they're attached at the hip, and expand the footprint of the SEC, possibly go after Clemson as well.
And that would provide a little bit of hoops depth for you, especially for a blue blood like Kentucky. SEC being able to market matchups with UNC, Kentucky, NC State, and you never know, a Duke, maybe a little bit better football program than what had been in years past. So it's going to be fascinating to see what Greg Sankey's answer to expansion talk is. He's never one to kind of lay his cards out on the table. Again, with Oklahoma and Texas, there was nothing. Nobody heard anything about it until it was done, except for a rumor that got put out there. And then all of a sudden it was kind of done. So it wouldn't surprise me to see Greg Sankey continue to be mum's the word. And then sometime down the line, we see the SEC bringing in some of these ACC schools that makes sense regionally. And I really do think the SEC wants to kind of maintain that regionality to an extent. Mm-hmm. Missouri is probably the furthest north they want to go. Oklahoma and Texas, probably the furthest west they want to get. And so I think adding a Florida State or a Miami out of the state of Florida makes sense. Getting up into North Carolina or even the DMV area with Virginia, it would not surprise me to see him go that route. Now we know that Billy Bowman, Danny Stutsman, and Jackson Arnold are going to be meeting with the media as Oklahoma's representatives this week. Stutsman, Bowman, no stranger to the media ordeal that they're going to have to endure, but kind of a big test for Jackson Arnold. This is he's met with the media at times over his Oklahoma career, but this is definitely the biggest event in which he's going to have to face the media.
Yeah, and with this regime, they actually allow freshmen to have conversations with the media, right? The former regime did not allow freshmen to talk at all with the media. And so this is new territory for us as Sooner fans, but it's not new for the SEC, luckily. And so for Jackson Arnold, he's going to come in there. He had the opportunity to speak a little bit, last season. Like you said, this is going to be new. He's going to be now in front of one of the larger media audiences out there in the country, because this is the premier conference. It means more. And so Jackson's they're going to pepper him with all kinds of questions. And I'm sensing they're going to really dig in to see where his head is going into the season, right? Oklahoma's not new to 5-star quarterbacks, but the other thing is we're still, we're walking into a new conference. And so, they're going to really be going after him and grilling him to see just how prepared he is for these big stadiums, for these big opponents. And of course, I think Jackson Arnold's going to be fine. He seems to have come across as one that's really good and been very well media trained, and that he can handle it himself. Watching some of his interviews, I think he's going to be fine, but they're definitely going to go after him and see what they can get. Yeah.
And we're going to be getting a Danny Stutsman soundbite in there. I don't think he's going to lay back and play humble in this forum. I mean, he definitely has leaned into kind of that WWE style of mouthpiece a little bit. Definitely going to drop a promo, but where do you think Brent Venables will end up landing? Because he's done nothing but talk about the strength of the SEC, talked about the conference, but at some point as the head coach of the Oklahoma Sooners, you have to start kind of being more not saying more confident, but almost promote an air of confidence about your program heading into the conference.
Yeah, he's not going to come up with any type of arrogance. He's going to give you a traditional coach speak, while at the same time, he gets long-winded, which is always fun. You ask him a certain question. If you can get a scheme question in there, which I'm going to try to sneak one in there, see if I can get him going for like 15 minutes and derail everything that's going on. That's my goal. So if that does happen, who created that entire situation. That is my entire purpose for this entire visit. I'm there to infiltrate, destabilize, all of that, and make sure that Brent Venables just goes on a tangent and everybody's like, oh goodness, who did this? And it's going to be your boy. But no, I really do think that Venables is going to exude confidence. He's not going to, like I say, he's not going to go in there and he's not going to be arrogant about it, but he's going to remind people that, Oklahoma has a tradition of winning against the SEC. When he was a defensive coordinator at Oklahoma, playing his SEC teams, he did well. Same thing whenever he was there at Clemson. So I sense that he's going to remind people, hey, my track record speaks for itself. Now all I got to do is execute here as a head coach. But I'm really curious to see what they grill him on around him being the head coach and him being the CEO role. Is he going to have his hands in everything? Will he be vetoing a lot of plays? I think that's going to be the one thing that's going to really tell us a lot about what's going to happen there at SEC meetings as well as this coming season.
Yeah, seems like the first year in which Brent Venables can really stand back and let somebody else fully run the defense. If the trust level, if the philosophy level is similar between him and Zach Alley, then Venables should be able to just kind of stand back and see. It's going to be, he is going to be a SEC media darling. I think a lot of them are going to love him in one way because he will give a prolonged answer to things, but in some respects, he might not provide as many answers in other respects. So it's going to be really fun to see the SEC getting their first taste of Brent Venables at the podium as well. So much to break down this week as SEC Media Days goes on. We'll react to things as they happen. The Oklahoma Sooners are set to meet with the media on Tuesday, I believe.
Tuesday, yep.
And it'll be in the afternoon, if I remember the schedule correctly. So Jay will have his thoughts from not just what happens with Oklahoma, but I'm sure he'll be interacting with folks on Radio Row and getting the pulse of SEC media throughout the week as well. And he'll be able to share that with us here on Locked On Sooners. Coming up, we got an update to the roster, and hey, that size is going to matter big time for the Oklahoma Sooners. Coming up next on Locked On Sooners. Passion, drive, and patience What brings home the win is also what keeps your ride or die alive. Go to ebaymotors.com where they have over 122 million parts to keep your ride or die alive. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to bring home that big win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay guaranteed fit only, available to U.S. customers. And thank you for making Locked On Sooners your first listen every single day. Go check out the Locked On Sports Today 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube and the free Amazon Fire TV app as well. You can get all the top stories in one place, streaming 24/7 for you over at Locked On Sports Today, again on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. And thank you for making Locked On Sooners your first listen every single day. For your second listen, it's SEC Media Day, so you got to go check out Chris Gordy and Locked On SEC all week long. He's going to have great insight and intel for you about what's happening. And if you missed the Jackson Arnold interview that he did from the Manning Passing Academy just a couple weeks ago, Chris Gordy got to sit down with Jackson Arnold and talk through some of those things that are big questions. So go check that out. Locked On SEC, search Jackson Arnold on wherever you get your podcasts. So the size is going to matter. Going into the SEC, we know the guys up front, both offensive line, defensive line, have to have the size to be able to keep up down in, down out, game to game. And it looks like Oklahoma's trending in a very, very positive direction on that, Jay.
Yeah, the roster's updated over the weekend. And so we got to see some of the offensive line and defensive line players. I mean, every position got updated. Not an official like PDF that's gone out for the fall, but they're putting in new information, and when you start to see some of these sizes grow, like let's start off strictly here on the defensive line, right? I think that's the one that in the offensive line, the two positions that we were truly concerned about, right? Wondering what it's going to look like. Well, coming in, we'll have two guys over 300 and about 20 pounds, roughly about 319 over. Damonic Williams as well as Dejon Terry. They're both clocking in at 319 and 323 respectfully. That may get adjusted as soon as fall ball hits when they have that final weigh-in right before they start working out and the OU DNA show comes back. You also see Jaden Jackson's at the 300 range. David Stone's right there underneath at 294. Grayson Halton's at 291, so he's just 9 pounds from 300. Ashton Champ Sanders is at 295. Marcus Strong is at 290. Devon Sears at 295. So you got a lot of dudes that are thick on that defensive line, and that's what you need going into the SEC. I am stoked to see that, but when I saw these edges, oh boy. These edges, 4 technique, 3 technique guys from Caden Woolard, who's sitting at about just under 260 at 259. Nigel Smith, 267. It's going to be fun. It's going to be fun, especially looking at this roster, man. That got your boys' attention. Got me excited.
Yeah, and I like that the edge guys aren't too big. I think in the past couple of years, they were trying to push them up towards that 270, 280 pound range, kind of the Rondo Bothroyd, and they lost a little bit of their explosiveness. And now they kind of slimmed back to that 260 to 265 range. I think Ethan Downs, where he's at, is a perfect size for him. And it's going to allow him to keep that explosiveness on the offensive line. Dude, Fabechi Wiwu coming in at 339, basically 340 at right guard. You might argue that's a little too much, but he's got the size and he's going to bring it. And I think being able to sandwich him, be one slice of the bread between Branson Hickman and whoever plays left guard. I think that's really, really big because, okay, Hickman's not the biggest dude. He's 301, still got decent size for center, but it's not like last year where we're coming in with a guy like Savion Byrd, who's maybe 280 playing guard. Your interior is a lot more stacked.
Yeah,
he's got a lot more size to him.
Right. Heath Uzeda comes in there at 318, right? 6'5", 318. And he's one that we've been talking about for a bit. He's younger and, he's one that's been working his way up. Gary and Hatchett coming in at 312, at 6'5" as well. So, yeah, that interior, Eugene Brooks, BJ Brooks, he's over here at 336. Him and Fabechi on the right side is just monstrous in size. We're going to be able to have a nice thick interior with an agile exterior on the left and right tackle. It's going to be very helpful for our run game. Man, imagine a GT counter with big old Fabichi Wewu coming right at you full steam ahead because he's got some quickness to him. And then you can't forget about Eddie Pierre-Louis, who runs like a 12.5 in the 100 at his size. He's down to 305. So he's gotten nimble and he's getting stronger. So basically, Schmitty is cutting the bad weight off of him, building them back up. The beauty of it is that, as you mentioned, they're gaining this weight, but they're not really losing most of their mobility, which is the one thing that's most important with the way Schmitty does things. He wants to make sure that you have that mobility and agility at the same time as the size. And so he's very meticulous about that portion of it. Sooner fans are going to love that.
Yeah, it's really intriguing to see some of the true freshmen already with really good size to them. And Daniel Akinkumi, Josh Isosa, Isaiah Autry, like all guys north of 310 already as true freshmen. So they're not likely going to play a whole lot this year. Although a guy like Autry, I've heard some really, really positive things from him from spring ball. It wouldn't surprise me to see him get some looks, but I think you're going to see these guys redshirt this year. But man, 2 full years in the Schmitty program going into 2025, those guys could be significant players for you along the offensive line if they continue to develop just the technical aspects of their game. I mean, it's really encouraging just to see where these guys are and the work that they've put in. Going back to the defensive side, we can talk Jaden Jackson. I mean, that's my guy. I can talk him all day long, but 6'2", 300, that's going to be a really, really important piece to you in your 3 deep at defensive tackle, at nose tackle, because he can play either one of those positions. So, if you want to, in your goal line situations, when you're going to be able to run out Dejon Terry at the nose and then Damonic Williams and Jaden Jackson on either side of him, and you've got 300 pounders right there in the middle. And then what else do you want to do? You can do whatever you want because you've got the middle locked down with 3 guys that are going to be very, very significant. There's going to be big time pieces that's going to make it really difficult for offensive linemen to move. We already saw last year how much a guy like Dejon Terry can affect the things in the middle. Well, now you've got a group of those guys that can affect those things. One other notable, Reggie Powers, a true freshman. That dude, he looks like he could go off to WWE right now and be a big time player in NXT. And I mean, he looks like Trick Williams. Like he's got that. Sorry, this is nerding out for some of our WWE fans. For those of you who aren't WWE fans, I'm sorry. But Reggie Powers he's got everything. Like he's got the size, he's got the build. He's going to be a physical player. I mean, it's very impressive to see what that safety room has done this offseason too.
Yeah, he has put on, it's funny because he came in pretty sizey already, right? He came in at 17 years old, roughly almost 220 pounds, right? You don't really hear that for a dude roughly about 6 feet tall at 220 pounds. That's a freshman, right? 17 years old. Just turned 18 this summer, by the way. So he is still nice and young, and he comes in with that size. He's dropped some. They've been trying to get him down because they want to keep him agile. So he's roughly like the 208, 209 range right now, and still looking chiseled, right? Between him, Jeremiah Newcomb, I've heard really good things about him, even though he's not the siziest guy, but he looks like he's a creative player. He looks completely chiseled out. And then Boganowski coming in like 221 pounds as well. That safety room is going to be nasty. And so, yeah, we had a deep dive into them next time we talk about the roster. But as these rosters get updated, something to be excited about. But one thing I looked at too, PJ Adebaware. We've been waiting for this 5-star plus to really show up. I mean, the big thing with him is it's always been in his head. He just thinks a little bit too much. He just doesn't react like he should, as naturally gifted as he is. 251. And I know BV wants him at the 260 range, and it sounds like he is creeping that direction. And so you get him at the 260, like an Ethan Downs, who's 265 right now, Caden Woolard, who's at 260, and then Art Mason Thomas maintaining his 240, 250 range. Yeah, we're going to have some terrorists out there at the edge that's going to be doing some damage going into SEC.
Yeah, the length is there. The size is there. Now it's just a matter of keeping some of these guys healthy and developing. For a guy like PJ, I think you're right. It's just get out there and just play football. Don't try to think too much. I hope they really just try to get him in there on some pass rush downs. I don't think he's going to play, north of 300 snaps this year. I could see somewhere around 200 just because they are deep. They have Ethan Downs and Caden Woolard and R. Mason Thomas. And I don't think that that's a slight against PJ. it takes time to get a full grasp of all of your responsibilities as a defensive end. But a guy like R. Mason Thomas, I mean, that's a dude that can bring the juice if he can just stay healthy. He's got the size, he's got the speed, the athleticism to really, really be a difference maker off the edge for you. Another guy that could be a difference maker for this defensive line, ESPN called him a sleeper for 2024. Who is it? We'll talk about that next, coming up here on Locked On Sooners. So ESPN released a sleeper for each of their top 25 players their top 25 teams in their preseason power rankings. And for the Oklahoma Sooners, they believe it is Danny Okoye, the 4-star freshman edge rusher out of Noah Homeschool Academy in the Tulsa area. And here's what Dave Wilson of ESPN College Football had to say. Freshman defensive lineman Danny Okoye arrived in Norman in January and got to work, putting on more than 20 pounds. The 6'3", 255-pound edge rusher has drawn praise from Coach Brent Venables this spring for his work ethic and athleticism. He reportedly runs a 4.56 40-yard dash, and as the Sooners try to find a rotation up front, Okoye could claim his share of playing time early on.
I'm going to be honest. He's the guy that I was kind of expecting out of the young group to actually get out there and play early. Danny is legitimately a huge human being. And it's funny because when he came on the show on Unfair Sports, he did an interview with me and my boy Coop. And we were asking him, like, so what got you into football? And he's just like, I just love the violence. Like, I love hitting people. And I'm just like, oh my goodness. We've got an edge that likes hitting people a lot. He just loves it. And he enjoys that violence in the game. That tells me that dude's going to do whatever he can to get himself on the field. And ESPN naming him the sleeper totally makes sense, right? Because coming from Noah, I think he was going to go to Jinx, but when COVID hit, he decided to stay homeschool. So he played Noah. People question his talent there or whatnot. He reminded me a lot of how Zion Williamson was when he was playing high school ball against those small Christian schools. It's like he just overpowered and was oversized compared to everybody. And they're like, oh, he's doing it to those little bitty kids. He's not going to do that at the next level. Goes to Duke and does it at the college level. And they're just like, oh, he's not going to do that at the NBA. Goes to the NBA and they're like, oh, okay, never mind. When he's healthy, he's a monster. He's a walking 27-7-7 with no problem whatsoever. That's what Danny reminded me of. The talent he went against, sure, you can have questions about that. But when you see the 4.5 40, right, you see that he's 255 pounds and he's legitimately at least 6'3". I think he's taller. When I stood next to him, I'm like, yeah, you look like more 6'4", 6'5-ish. He's a ginormous human being, but he can move that fast. Put him out there at a jack roll and let him just go attack nonstop. Him and Deshaun McCullough. Oh my goodness. He's going to wreak havoc. And I think that's going to lead to him getting play early on in his career.
Yeah, he's definitely got the tools and he's got the intangibles. The work ethic is there. Now it's just a matter of going and doing it, right? This is going to be a very fascinating story to watch and a very fascinating career because, as you mentioned, he doesn't come from the powerhouse program in Oklahoma like a Jenks or a Union or even a Booker T. Washington. Mm-hmm. No, he's coming a very different route, but that doesn't mean that we should sleep on him very much. Any other sleepers, maybe from the offensive side of the ball, that you think could be guys that break out this year?
If someone's to jump out to me on the offensive side of the ball we talked about Fabichi Wewu. I think he's really going to end up being a legitimate opportunity to be an All-American in the SEC, at least all-conference, if not an All-American. He was a freshman All-American, and I think that he can continue to develop and grow into that. He's definitely one to keep your eyes on. But Ivan Carrion is one wide receiver. At 6'6" and his ability to move, there's a good chance that he may fight and find a way to get himself on the field just a little bit to get people's attention. If we're sticking to freshmen, he's one that I could see fighting his way on the field where they're like, look, we've got to create packages to put this dude on the field just because of the fact, not only with him being 6'6", he has a very wide catch radius, very long arms, and he can move. Right. So you would think he's a tight end, but he gives you that Mark Andrews type of downfield threat with size at the same time and some speed. So if Carrion will be one, I would definitely keep my eyes on, as well as with the Danny Okoye. And if I was to go with the transfer side, I am still super high on Caden Woolard. getting double-digit sacks in the MAC is not as easy as people think it is. And I feel like his game's going to translate similar to what Jared Verse did when he translated over to Florida State. I feel like he has those capabilities, even playing at that group of 5. Caden has the work ethic. That's the one thing I love about this. And you mentioned this a minute ago, not to go too long-winded, but I really appreciate that we don't have any dudes that we can say, you know what, they don't really work hard, or nobody's really pushing back on that. It's like there's conversations around everybody fighting their way to get on the field. And I love hearing that. That is a very encouraging thing, because that means that ain't nobody going to slack. Everybody's going to try to find a way to make sure they're getting their playing time.
Right. And whatever playing time they earn is earned. It's not given. It doesn't matter what your star status was coming out of high school, how much pub you got coming out of high school. No, whatever you get on the field, you've earned it. You've earned the opportunity to get on the field. Caden Woolard's going to be really fascinating. You mentioned it's not easy in the MAC. In these big time passing leagues where they try to get the ball out pretty quick, you're right. It is hard to get that many sacks. That's why often we didn't see big sack numbers at times in the Big 12, especially in that 2010 to 2020 range where, okay, Obo Okoronkwo might lead the team in sacks with like 6.5. And you're like, okay, that's not very many. But when teams are getting the ball out in 2 seconds or less, you're not going to get many opportunities for sacks. So very fascinating choice. Dude, could they please roll out a 3 wide receiver package with Nick Anderson, Ivan Carrion, and Jaden Gibson? Please get my triplet towers out there. Just
6'4", 6'5", 6'6".
In the goal line, inside the red zone. Just see how it runs in non-conference. Do it against Temple. Do it against Tulane, against Houston. See how it works. If it works for you, then you've got that in your back pocket as you go into SEC play. Offensively, I'm really intrigued by a guy like Taylor Tatum. Didn't arrive until summertime, but already had kind of made some noise. You're hearing some rumblings that he's been very, very impressive, even just arriving on campus and being a part of the summer workouts. So that's a guy, like, as we talk about running back, we know Gavin Sawchuk's going to get fed. We know Javonte Barnes is now healthy and seemingly primed to reprise his role from the 2022 season, where he was the backup to Eric Gray and he racked up more than 500 yards as a true freshman. You got Sam Franklin. You got Caleb Hicks, who was really impressive in the spring game. Can Taylor Tatum carve out a little bit of a role for himself, either as a running back or in the kick return duties? I think they got to find a way to get him on the field somehow, because he's just too good of an athlete. Defensively, aside from the true freshman, because again, I can always talk all day about Jaden Jackson, I'm really looking forward to seeing Des Malone in a full-time role. Good size, good athleticism, had a really nice career at San Diego State. Obviously, Oklahoma brings him in, I think, to be a significant player, not just a backup. I think they're planning on him and banking on him, pushing for a starting role, and you get him in where he specializes, in zone coverage. And hopefully that can help. If you've got him and Gentry Williams at your cornerback spots, 2 guys that do really well in zone, I think it bodes well for Oklahoma's defense this year.
No, I agree with you 100%. Des Malone is one of those players that he's a specialist. He's really, really good in the amount of starts that he had at San Diego State in the zone range. Yeah, I'm really intrigued by what he's going to do and what he's going to bring. Right, I think that Kenai Walker did very well when we brought him in a couple of years ago, and you adding in Des on top of Gentry Williams, and the biggest thing with Gentry is really got to make sure that he's healthy. Right, Gentry needs to be healthy. Woody coming back and them planning on roaming him around in multiple positions. Man, the secondary this year, the defense, period, I have zero concerns about. This is going to be one of the best defenses we've seen at Oklahoma in a while, especially because everybody's into the scheme and they understand their assignments. The fewer mistakes we see in this defense, the more problems it's going to be for the opposing teams.
And that's going to do it for today's episode of Locked On Sooners. Thanks so much for tuning in and being a part of the show. If you want more from us here on Locked On Sooners, make sure you go join the Locked On Sooners Insider Program by texting SEC 2024 to 405-817-6711. That's SEC 2024 to 405-817-6711 to get 25% off your first month with the Locked On Sooners Insider Program. Jay and I are going to be hosting Q&A sessions. We'll do prospect reviews. We'll also provide some video from this week at SEC Media Day and whatever else Jay gets up to. That'll be in the Locked On Sooners Insider Program as well. We'll share our insight, some intel. If you got questions that you want us to answer, make sure you go join us. Again, SEC 2024 to 405-817-6711 to get 25% off your first month over at the Locked On Sooners Insider Program. Follow Jay on Twitter all week long for updates and intel from SEC Media Days at Unfair Sports. Follow myself at John 9 Williams, observing from afar as I do the family thing with the youngins. But cannot wait to break down what happens and what everybody has to say about Oklahoma and how they think Oklahoma is not going to do very well this year in the SEC. We'll react to all that coming up this week here on Locked On Sooners. So stay tuned, subscribe to the show. And for your second listen, again, go check out Locked On SEC with our man Chris Gordy here on the Locked On Podcast Network, where we cover your team every single day. But for Jay Smith, I'm John Williams. We'll catch you next time. Boomer
Sooner.